we may never be able to completely remove it or diminish udder edema completely, but what can we do to reduce the severity of it?
Welcome back to the Dairy Podcast Show. My name is Barry Bradford from Michigan State University, and today I'm very pleased to be talking with Cora Okkema, who is a colleague of mine at Michigan State. So Cora is an MSU Extension dairy educator located in Mecosta County, Michigan, serving the northwest part of the Lower Peninsula. She earned her BS in Animal Science from DeWart College in 2016, and following that, she briefly worked in livestock nutrition before becoming the herdsman on her family's dairy farm. And she completed an MS in livestock behavior and welfare at Colorado State University and finishing up in 2022. So Cora, thank you so much for being a part of the Dairy Podcast Show.
Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
One thing I thought it would be interesting to talk through, you've taken a little bit of an unusual track, I guess. You finished your bachelor's degree, did some dairy nutrition work, worked on your family's dairy farm for a while, then going back to graduate school and ending up in the extension. How did you step through that process? What made you decide to take that route, I guess?
I think a great way to sum it up is life happened.
Yeah.
And so life does what it does. And I necessarily did not have a plan after graduating with my bachelor's. Like, I had been searching for jobs. I had been sending out resumes, talking with different companies. Initially, I wanted to go into the genetics side of things. So either like working with select sires or something like that, but none of that really panned out. And I then met a company called AgriKing, a couple great individuals from there who took me under their wing. And that's how I started in the dairy nutrition side. Realized sales was certainly not my passion in life. And it happened at the same time where on my family's dairy farm, the current herdsman wanted to retire. And so I just asked my dad, I was like, hey, can I give this a shot? And it was something where I was like, I knew there was going to be a learning curve. I knew I was going to be overwhelmed and learn a lot and not know everything. And I think the biggest takeaway that I had from that is I never stopped asking questions. I never stopped wanting to learn and understand and figure out, what's the best way to do this, whether it was for me, for the employees, for the cows. Like, do we have to change up a system? Do we have to implement new protocols? Do we have to have trainings or all of these different things where it's like, what makes the most sense? And then going to graduate school, for me, it was a lofty dream where there was a part of me that said, I want to prove it to the world that a small town dairy kid can get into grad school and, do research, because that was something where I'm a first generation college student, and then coming from the dairy farm being like, yep, I can do research. Like, I've been able to be in both worlds, and doing my master's was, that was a whirlwind, to say the least. I learned to appreciate the frustrations that come with research and how difficult it is to perform high quality research and to really answer all of the questions that you can come up with, but no, hey, I can only tackle one at a time, right. Which for me, I was just like, I want to answer 20 right away. But it was such an awesome experience because so much of my practical work as a herdsman influenced how I approached research. I wanted to focus on a topic that could be immediately applied to farmers. And it really framed how I set up my study, how I, approached farms and went on farms and really sorted out what I wanted to do, how I wanted to do it, and where I saw the value in the results and in all the information that I was learning. And so it was very helpful to be able to connect with the farmers and the employees and say like, hey, this is why we're doing this, or Yeah, I really don't understand why udder edema happens. The whole dairy industry really doesn't have a specific answer of like, yup, this is a pinpoint reason why it's happening. We're all just as curious and we're all trying to figure it out together. But it also taught me that in order to get to this grand answer that we all want to figure out, we have to start at the beginning. And so it's getting to the basics of like, okay, how prevalent is it? And how prevalent is udder edema? And, you know, what are the signs? What are we seeing? How are we able to, develop a scoring system? Or how are we able to start noticing it and keep track of it and all these different things? But and then going from grad school to extension work, that was also kind of another dream where I was like, man, am I really ready for extension? Because I was like, I should get some more industry experience before I step into extension. And I think that's a little bit of the imposter syndrome coming through. But it has been such a welcoming community in the extension space, in the university space, and for my colleagues, but also other farmers that I've talked to, where I had a sit down with one farmer and he was talking to me about previous extension experience that he's had. And he said, I'm so thankful that there's another extension agent in our area that's serving our community. And he said, you can't ever expect yourself to fill that other person's shoes because you're your own individual and you bring your own strengths and passions to the industry. And I was just like, oh, thank you. Like, that's just what I needed to hear from a farmer. So it's been a whirlwind of a track. I wouldn't trade it for the world because all of those experiences got me to where I am with my career today.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
So let's dive in now. You brought up udder edema. That's a lot of what I wanted to talk about. So I'll give you my perspective on it. So I work sort of on inflammation and at sort of systemic level and kind of the molecular biology of that to some extent. So occasionally someone will be foolish enough to send me an email or call me and ask me about edema. Like once a year, I'll get something about, I have edema in Heifers. Can you help us solve this? And I'm always like, I don't know anything. So I've gotten these calls, emails, and I'll try to dig in, like you already said, like what actually triggers this? What has anybody figured out? And I find almost nothing. So when I learned, before you came to start at MSU, I been aware of the work you were doing, and I thought it was fantastic that somebody was trying to, build some solid underpinning into our understanding here. So can you start off? There's probably other people that know very little about this. Can you give us a bit of a primer to start with? So what did you learn about how common this condition is? Does it basically only happen in Heifers? Is it a problem for the animal, or is it just something that happens and it's fine?
Yeah, absolutely. So during, while I was putting together my literature review, I was digging all the way back until I think the earliest I found. I think that'd be the technical chronological way to say it. I think it was in the 1950s.
Okay.
Is when I had seen some form of a publication of udder edema. So it's certainly been around for quite a while, at least 50 years or 70 years, at least 70 years. And the best theory that we have right now for udder edema, and let me explain what udder edema is first.
Yep.
So udder edema is it's essentially lymphatic fluid that is trapped within the tissues of the udder. It can spread towards the barrel or even up to the brisket in more severe cases. It can also go up into the hind legs, up until the vulva area. Those are very extreme cases. I've only seen maybe one or two that have been that bad, but I have seen, with my experience as a herdsman, which is what got me interested in trying to figure out what is udder edema, what's causing it. I need to understand this. And so the theory that is out there, and it's been swimming around, and is that it's the immature vascularity of a heifer when they're in that transition period. So 3 weeks before calving, that there's inadequate drainage of the venous blood that is coming to the mammary system and then trying to leave. And so all of that blood is going to that mammary system for lactogenesis. So for the creation of milk, but there's still udder development happening. And so you have just this major influx without the proper systems in place for the outflow of that blood to happen. So it's very much like a bottleneck where, say you're going from an 8-lane highway down to a 4-lane highway. It's slow. It's going to take forever to leave that area. So that's the same thing.
Wait, let's unpack that just for a second to make sure we don't lose anybody. So like you said, with rapidly developing tissue like this growing mammary gland, this developing mammary gland, a big piece of that we sometimes can easily forget is the growth of new blood vessels, right? So
yes,
and obviously all that tissue growth requires a lot of oxygen and nutrients and such, and so there's got to be blood flow coming in, but then you also have to develop the venous blood flow leaving, right? And so so that's your point. And then the other piece I wanted to make sure we touch on is the lymphatic system. So if people haven't studied anatomy for a few years, maybe they've forgotten that that's sort of this other drainage system, and it's also tied in with the immune system, right? So we have lymph nodes. If you have swollen neck sometimes when you have a cold, that's a lymph node swelling up, and that's connected to this network through your whole body, and that helps drain fluids that are not in the blood vessels, right? So it helps recirculate other fluids. Okay, so good.
Yeah. Thank you.
Fluid accumulation, right? Some disconnect between vascular flow of fluids and lymphatic clearance of fluids. Okay.
Yep, absolutely. And what's really interesting that I figured out during my time reading was that the what common terminology is called the milk vein, that actually isn't formed in heifers before they start milking. And so actually it's created through anastomosis. And that was something that was just mind blowing to me. I was like, oh my gosh, no way. And that makes so much sense. So it's essentially like mending together.
Okay.
And merging together. That's the word that I was coming for. So it was crazy to me just learning about that and realizing like, oh, that's how that's made. Because like, you don't think about it until someone points it out and you're just like, yeah, like heifers don't have milk veins when they come in. Yeah. And then you're just like, oh, but then you see a second lactation cow. Yeah, she's got it for sure. And then you're just like, wow, now it makes so much sense. And then you're like, okay, now she has that 8-lane highway where it's not as much of an issue. But on that topic though, when so heifers are at a greater risk for developing udder edema, and that is because of that immature vascularity. And then heifers, and this was found by Melendez, I think it was 2006 is that citation, Melendez 2006. They found that heifers that are calving in the wintertime, granted, this was done in Florida, by the way, too, so it could very much be different regionally. Heifers were 3.68 times at a greater risk of developing udder edema when they're calving in the winter. And they also found that at first test date, heifers with udder edema have, on average, 7.9 pounds less at that test date. So it certainly affects milk. And they're also at a greater risk for developing edema in later lactations. And that's commonly found throughout multiple sources where, if they get it in the first one, more than likely going to get it in the second one. And that's a big thing right there, because it deteriorates support structures. And when you have deteriorating support structures, then you have low-hanging udders, and udder edema itself is a risk for mastitis. And it also gets into udder cleft dermatitis, which is a risk for mastitis. And it's very interesting because udder edema is so interconnected with other things.
Right.
But there's no one thing where it's like, yup, this is it. And there was also some findings by, I'm not sure the pronunciation, but Kojori, I believe is the pronunciation, but I may totally be wrong. It's Kojouri. They were looking at biochemical serum markers and looking at seeing, is there something we can see within the serum that could help give us some sort of direction of why this is happening. And so they were saying that total protein, calcium, phosphorus, HDL, and LDL were all decreased in heifers with udder edema. And so I'm thinking, okay, that's liver. That's like impairment of the liver that's happening right there. And then I also, Morrison et al. In 2018, that's the most recent research that's currently published right now, from my understanding. They found that their heifers with udder edema had, there was a greater prevalence of subclinical ketosis in week 2 in heifers with udder edema. And so that was really interesting too, that there's multiple studies that are kind of leaning towards the same direction. And so udder edema affects the milk. It affects support structures. It's a risk factor for mastitis and what's ketosis. But my focus was more on the welfare side of things, where, is this causing discomfort? And that's such a tricky field to start doing research in, because you can't just immediately say, yes, it's painful because she's kicking. Like,
related cow.
Right. And that's the tricky part about it, because cows do have a personality where just one may be more sensitive, one just may not be having it that day, and same with people.
Yeah.
But there's also kind of an addition to fight or flight. It's fight, flight, or freeze. And so one of the other graduate students in my lab, she was working on that side of things in the scope of dairy heifers freshening and coming into the milking parlor, where she was trying to figure out, is a dairy heifer or first calving cow, is that freeze response really a good thing? And because we're looking at stress, we're looking at all of these different things where, it's a welfare and then production. Where is she actually letting down? Is that oxytocin getting into her system and providing adequate letdown so that, one, doesn't increase the risk of mastitis, but also she has continued longevity within the herd? And so it was really interesting seeing all of those different factors play into my research, where currently it's unpublished right now, but going through review. So that is promising. But yeah, we found that we were looking at first and second lactation cows, and we did find that the heifers with edema did kick more. And we were just looking at stepping and kicking, and if they had edema and didn't have edema, because we wanted to keep it very simple.
All right. Yep.
Because this is that first step in that direction. So if we strongly felt that, implementing a scale would have taken a lot more time, taken a lot more animals, and we didn't know if it actually would have shown us anything worthwhile. And so we felt, that would be the step 2 of that project, where, yep, that'd be good for a PhD kind of thing. And yeah, so it was very interesting. We found that certainly greater number of kicks, but it wasn't conclusive in the fact that, yes, udder edema causes first lactation cows to kick more or step more. And so that was the frustrating part where I was just like, oh, you're supposed to just say yes. But yeah, that is the nature of research that I learned, where you have this intended result that you would like to get. Granted, you can't frame your research to get that and that hoped for result, but it really enforced that udder edema is so complicated. And it's one of those things where I feel somebody could spend their entire career on, and we may never find the answer, but we'll get one step closer. And especially on like with your work in the inflammation and oxidative stress side, because it's been found that oxidative stress certainly plays into udder edema. And so I'm just thinking, okay, how do you take that and run with it? And how do we get a greater understanding of prevalence within the dairy industry? Because with my study, 90.6% of cows in my study had udder edema.
How did you define that? What was the threshold to cross to be defined as, yeah, this is edema?
Mm-hmm. So I used the reference scale from Morrison et al. 2018, and she had a 4-point scale. It was 0, 1, 2, 3. So 0, no edema. 1, that was my marker for, yes, it had edema, because that's when you saw the softening of the medial cleft ligament.
Okay.
Yep. And so that's when I'm like, yes, that fluid is there. And that led me to another question of like, okay, how much edema is actually present for us to start seeing it visually versus when it's actually forming in the udder itself, where it's like, okay, how much volume of edema or volume of that lymphatic fluid needs to be there for us to start seeing it visually. And I thought that's just very interesting. And so my mind always comes up with all of these ideas and questions, and I feel like I need to just have a whole wall of research questions. But with the prevalence of my study, it was so high, but it was very hard to find prevalence in other studies where either their research was, they needed to have matched control and treatment animals, or they're just like, well, this is what we found. Like the Melendez study, they had a 13% prevalence, but that was done in Florida. And I don't know what time of year they did their study in, where like certainly it seems they had done a winter and summer season, it seems like, because they had those numbers in their study, but it's Florida. So that's completely different region than it would be in Michigan or other areas of the United States. The Morrison et al. 2018 study, they were up in Canada, and 70% of the cattle in that study had edema either pre-parturition, post-parturition, or in both those stages. And so I was only looking at post-parturition.
Okay.
So and that's kind of what I've been able to find for prevalence, but it's a stretch to really find prevalence numbers in studies. And that's something where it's like, it'd be nice to actually see how much udder edema we actually have across the U.S. or within states or within the dairy industry, because it is more prevalent in heifers and very common in Holsteins and Jerseys. It's theorized that it's more, the appearance of udder edema is more severe in Jerseys just because of their short stature. But it's paired genetically with milk production potential. So that is something that's also been proven in that sense, where if these heifers that are coming in have great milk production potential or high numbers for milk production potential, they are at a greater risk for developing udder edema, which makes sense. You're just like, you're genetically, this animal is primed to make milk. Physiologically right now, she's not ready for it. And anatomically, she's just not ready for it. And so it's just like her body's having to play catch up all the time, and until her body can then regulate and just be like, okay, now anatomically, we're able to sustain what our genes are telling us to do.
Yeah, that's fascinating. When you see a 90% prevalence, when you're looking at it carefully and like really looking for subtle signs of it, yeah, what I wonder is if we're not seeing something that's basically always happening. It's just a degree of magnitude, right? And it's fascinating. Yeah, and I almost wonder if there would be, you said it's been associated with decreased milk productivity, but also associated with high production genetics. So I wonder if it's not like a very subtle mild edema actually would be correlated with high milk production, but if it gets extreme, it disrupts the process. Something. I don't know. A lot of work to do.
Yes, certainly many, many questions to answer. So
maybe there's not anything that you can say because we don't know enough, but I wondered if there was one or two key takeaways that like a herd manager could take away from all the work you've done, like to actually implement things around this topic of edema.
Yeah. So I'd say the two big takeaways from my research that managers could apply to their farms. One is, if possible, having a separate pre-fresh diet for your heifers and your mature cows, because your heifers don't need anionic salts. Like, they just don't. So, and it's the anionic salts that can contribute to development of udder edema. So that is, on a management side, that right there is something that could be done. And, oh man, I think the second is that with udder edema, in my personal opinion, it's gotten to a point where we may never be able to completely remove it or diminish udder edema completely. But, what can we do to reduce the severity of it? Whether it's applying a liniment or making sure that there's comfortable bedding, or because these cows are lying down all the time. And if you're lying down and then you have all of that pressure, it's like you're cutting off or at least slowing down that supply. And yeah, looking and also, yeah, with heifers, good body size, but not obese, and maintaining that body condition score of those heifers coming in, body condition score and age, because those are also factors too, where just like in mature cows, if they're coming in fat, you're going to have greater risk for metabolic problems. And sure, that's the same thing in heifers, where if they're coming in with greater levels of body condition, older, they're certainly carrying their condition well. That's something too, where, that's something a lot of managers already look for. It's like, that's another thing to keep in mind, where it's like, hey, that's something where if we want to prevent this from potentially causing problems, lactations down the road, that's something to think of too.
All right, switch gears just a little bit. One of the topics that's come up more and more frequently in the last few years, especially around the pandemic, right, is mental health. And I understand that that's a topic you're passionate about, and just curious, what has led you to spend some of your focus time on this topic?
Yeah, so I have utilized mental health resources quite frequently with what I'd say within the past 3 to 4 years. Fortunately, Colorado State University has a couple programs in place that promote the usage of mental health resources, and they have provision of those resources for graduate students. And I was able to very much manage my stress and understand what are healthy coping mechanisms for stress. But a big thing too is what are examples of healthy communication to have with other people. But also it really helped fight the stigma that, people only go to a therapist when they have problems. And I proactively went to a therapist because I was like, I want to help give myself the resources, the tools, the skills in order to manage my stress levels, in order to, complete this degree on time, which COVID happens. we all know what happened there. But yeah, and I still utilize therapy today because, life happens. Like I had said before, life happens. And whether it's family dynamics or relationships or friendships or work stressors or, all these other things that could be impacting your life. One, it helps to just get it out. That's a big thing for me. But two, you're going to someone who's been trained in this profession to help understand you and help give you a different perspective of what's going on to help you think through it. And that's stuff where I really appreciate it, where someone's like, well, what about this? Like, let's think about it this way. Or have you heard about this method? And I'm like, oh no, like, tell me more. Or they're just like, I'm just kind of going through all the sessions that I've had with my therapist, and she's absolutely phenomenal. And
sounds a little bit like taking a proactive approach to like equipment maintenance instead of waiting until your tractor completely breaks down and you can't feed tomorrow morning.
Yes,
before you call somebody in. Yeah, right.
Yeah, your brain is the thing that runs the rest of you. Yeah. And if
for most of us, I mean, we've all met a few.
Right. Right. Ideally. And so, like, with motivation and discipline and understanding the way the world works and other people and relationships, it's with farming especially, that was the hardest job I had ever done, because you are asked to do so much and it has to be perfect, or something is going to get the negative side of it, whether it's the cows, the calves, the employees, the equipment, or, you're going to make your day go an hour longer. Like me, who left open a gate, and I was just like, oh gosh, now I have to go catch cows. Or it's like, oh, I forgot to put this one cow in the chute. Now I have to go bring her all the way back around. All of that, where it's so stressful and you feel like you can never catch a break sometimes.
Yeah.
And especially with farming, it is still a taboo topic, and there's a lot of stigma around it. And I think that's a generational thing. But with my generation, and generations younger than me, it seems like therapy is something that you do on the more proactive side of things, where it's just like openly talked about, and it's just like, oh yeah, I met with my therapist, or oh yeah, I'm looking forward to therapy today. And it's just taken in the sense of like, oh yeah, I'm going to go do my oil change now, or yeah, I'm going to go do my yearly checkup with my doctor. And me talking so casually about it is I make a point to do that, because it's just like, yeah, it's okay. Like, it's nothing to have any shame about, because you're taking care of yourself. And if you aren't taking care of yourself, you're going to burn out. You're going to get exhausted and stressed to a point where you can't fulfill the responsibilities of the farm or of the job that you're trying to do.
Yeah. And I think one of the values of talking about it more routinely is if you go meet with a producer that is really hitting bottom, that's not a time when people are necessarily very open to new suggestions, right? Right. You're kind of in a feeling like trapped. And if somebody bring you out, you almost hesitate to bring it up because they might be offended by it, right? Whereas if you're just kind of throwing it out there all the time, maybe somebody is more receptive at some point before they sort of hit bottom. So I appreciate your effort on that. So one other point of emphasis for you that you brought up is working to engage with consumers, right? So, and obviously you're only you're less than a year into this role. We know you're just sort of building what your areas of focus are going to be, but I'm curious, if you were given an opportunity to really get in front of some consumers, is there one insight about the dairy industry that you would hope to transmit to them or to share with them?
Oh, I think the kind of overarching topic that I would share with consumers is that the majority of dairy farms are still family owned and operated. That is such a big connecting point where when I have conversations with folks out in public, they're just like, "Oh, you're a dairy farmer?" And they're just like, "What?"
Yeah.
And most people assume dairy farmers are, 60, 70-year-old men who are just wearing their coverall bibs and walking around.
Straw hat. Don't forget that. Yeah.
Right. We need the pitchfork too. And they're kind of taken aback, like, wow, okay, tell me more. And being really really open with sharing that, yes, this is a family effort. It's our passion. And there's so many things that we do to care for our animals. Granted, you can't just start saying, "Oh, yes, sand bidding is good to keep these cows dry." And, all these very technical things that we know, but really giving them kind of skimming the top of of that conversation where it's just like, we care what we do and we strive to create quality products, and it's products that are safe for us, because we wouldn't produce a product that's not safe for us, let alone safe for other families to consume. And we put so many proactive measures in place for those protections that we want to ensure, no matter what, that is a good quality product, that it's safe for families, safe for anyone, all ages, but also products that can be made to serve different communities where some folks are sensitive to lactose. So, lactose free or A2 milk or all of these other milk products that can be created or processed in a way to serve those communities. Or, let's create some yogurts or like the Fairlife milks or all of these different things that really can meet the needs of the people where they're at. And that's something that I love seeing, the fascination and aha moments, especially in kids' eyes, when they're just like, "Wow, like that's a cow, that's so cool." And sending my friends pictures of a newborn calf, and social media presence is huge too. And so a lot of the content creators out there just creating videos and educational posts, and I've made a few of those myself and sent to some people, and they're just like, "Wow, it's crazy to see how relaxed these cows are around you." And I was like, yeah, and that's the payoff of calm, low stress handling. They literally don't care that you're there. As long as you feed them, they don't care. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Well, we've got 3 questions that we ask of every guest, and it's been interesting to hear the variety of answers I've gotten so far. So first of all, what is your favorite dairy related book or resource?
I had to make sure I wrote these down so I remember them. So dairy related book is actually The Welfare of Cattle by Bernard Rowland. And I had the esteemed pleasure to take his ethics course. And unfortunately, it was the last ethics course that he had taught before he passed away. But just getting into that man's mind it's a hoot. He's hilarious as a person and a complete character, but he has such a passion for animal welfare and really pushed buttons for sure.
Yeah.
But also really he asked the hard questions, and he wasn't afraid to step on a number of toes in order to really, say like, hey, is this the best way that we can do this? And just a lot of valuable information from that man, but also what he has produced and published.
Okay, that's a new answer. I like that.
Yeah.
What about your favorite book or resource outside of agriculture?
Outside of agriculture, I'd actually say it's the Jocko podcast, and it's one I love listening to, like military stories, and so they bring in a lot of guests that have military experience, but it's all framed on leadership and personal development, and so a lot of great talking points, but fascinating stories that just wrap you in completely, and you're just like, I'm there. And so very, very interesting. But on a less serious side, there's a podcast called Stuff You Missed in History Class. And so those are a lot of fun stories where you're just like, oh my gosh, how did I never know about this? You learn a lot real quick.
Those are good. I've heard multiple people talk about the Jocko podcast. I'll have to look that one up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And last but not least, in your opinion, what sets a successful dairy professional apart from those who may not be so successful?
As someone who went through one of the steepest learning curves of a herdsman probably in all existence, being flexible in meeting people where they're at, whether it's employees or anyone that you're working with, but surrounding yourself with a team of individuals that will stand by you no matter the outcome of a decision that you make. That is a big one right there, because I heavily relied on the veterinarian, the nutritionist, our breeder, my dad, and other individuals, other trusted individuals that I ask questions constantly of just, what should I do here? What's the best course of action? Or, hey, I really want to try this, all of that. But also, I was there when our farm went through our expansion. And so brand new milking parlor, added about 150 cows. And so just a lot of things happening at once. And the willingness to embrace change, even though it's scary. That's a big one.
Yeah, very good points. That's terrific. Well, Cora, thank you so much for being part of the Dairy Podcast Show. It's been an excellent conversation. I've enjoyed it very much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And it is a special interest to me, and I could talk for hours on it probably, but it's been a pleasure to speak on all of my passions today. And if anyone has any further questions, feel free to contact me. Very open to it. And any resources anyone wants, definitely let me know.
All right. Well, thanks again, Cora Okkema from Michigan State University. And if you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to subscribe to the Dairy Podcast Show so you can catch all these episodes. And with that, we'll sign off. Thank you.